You've just entered the law offices of Quibble, Squabble, and Bicker. If you've come for actual legal advice, you need to turn right around, honey. You need to get out of here, 'cause you ain't gonna get none of that. They quibble, and they squabble, and they bicker. But if you want to hear meaningless opinions, this is the right place. They got plenty of that. Stuff that makes no sense at all. They go off on tangents. It's crazy talk. If that's your thing, keep listening. They'll keep talking.
Oh no no, oh no no, it's another episode of the Law Offices of Quibble, Squabble and Bicker. You've entered the Law Offices of Quibble, Squabble and Bicker. Yay!
Welcome back to another episode of the Law Offices of Quibble, Squabble, and Bicker on this March 10th, 2021. We have an extraordinarily special guest today. His name is John Robb, and he is a founding member of the punk bands The Membranes and Goldblade. He's been on the scene since the late 70s and has written approximately 1,032 books, or at least 10. And I think your most recent one was just in November, one called Manifesto, about Green Energy Pioneer. But he's also going to be helping us later on with, we're actually going into court today, everybody. We're taking vegans on trial. So normally we don't get to court, we just deal with things here, but today we're going to court. And he'll help us out with that later on. So Mr. Robb comes from a family of overachievers. His sister's like the head of CARE International. His brother is a diplomat in the Foreign Service. And he is obviously no slouch in his own right, as well as being a journalist and the founder of the music magazine website Louder Than War, which has been around for about 10 years now. I know Greg has read your book that you published about 15 years ago, Punk Rock and Oral History. So I'm going to turn things over to Greg to start asking some questions as opposed to hearing me blather on and on.
His first question is, can I have my money back?
No, not at all. It's the best money I ever spent. I think I got it used. So, I don't think I paid full price. It was on Amazon or something. But yeah, it was an excellent book. I want to read more of your stuff now, but I just love the whole oral history, putting all those voices together. And did you know a lot of these people, like before you did your research? Like, were they on the scene and you were pals with them? And then years later, you were like, hey, would you help me write this book?
Probably about 2/3 of them I knew from just playing festivals, being a journalist, being around for years. And the other third I just got in touch with. I think for me, what works in the book is how contradictory it is, how everybody has a completely different version of the same set of events, which is great, because punk by its very nature cannot have a linear history. It has to be contradictory, doesn't it? Some people like John Ryder are even contradictory with himself.
I know he was,
which is great. It's fantastic. It should always. It's an eternal argument, punk, and that's what keeps it fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
How would you define punk for those who aren't that?
Well, you can't. You see, I always say this to people, that anybody who defines punk is out of the equation straight away, because a lot of people say, "Oh, it's just loud, fast music with a lot of shouting," but then you got bands who didn't do that. The original punk in England in 76, 77, the British version of it was all the bands were totally different bands, different backgrounds, for different reasons. And it somehow felt the same, but it all sounded different. There wasn't really a set sound. It became codified as it went along, like all music culture does. Which doesn't matter for most music cultures, but it kind of matters with punk, because punk was never meant to be codified. It could be anything, It was. I would say, if you have to say it's anything, it's more of an attitude and it's a state of mind more than a style of music.
Well, both Greg and Brendan were in punk bands. And so I'm just curious if you guys agree with that. Is it a state of mind for you guys? Do you still have that state of mind?
Yeah, I think John really hits it on the head, in that it is a state of mind. In fact, the worst thing you could do to a person who's into that sort of music is to call him a punk rocker. Because in the 80s there was punk, there was hardcore, there was power punk at a certain point. I mean, it was like all sorts of weird genres within the music itself. But out from the outside in, I think, and Greg can probably, expand on this. From the outside in, it was all just punk music, and they had weird haircuts, or they had earrings back when earrings were cool, and but inside, it was a whole, like in the Seattle area where I grew up, you had punks, you had kind of skinheads, you had skater punks, you had a whole, like, there were gangs within, but somehow the cool part of it is somehow together we were one. We had our differences, like we were squabbly family members, but together we kind of stuck together.
You had the common enemy, jocks and frat boys. United.
Same here, but the same thing. You will get beaten up for dressing differently in the 70s in the UK. I think the British punk was always more dressed up on it than American punk. It was more. I remember like a lot of the bands in America, like from Seattle especially. It was the coming out to that Nirvana period. It was more like the lumberjack shirts and that kind of look. Whereas in England, I guess because we have the dandy thing, and it goes through the mods, and we've always liked dressing up in England, and Americans like to dress down. So that was one difference. I mean, it doesn't make the music massively different. I also think the other thing that's interesting in America is the Ramones, who are a huge influence here, of course. But the Ramones weren't ever a punk band. They weren't formed as a punk band. They were just an amazing pop band with great buzzsaw guitars. But the thing about the Ramones was it was kind of cartoon. It was kind of playing for laughs a lot. Whereas a lot of the British bands were quite serious in the 70s. And so you can see there was definitely a difference between American and British punk, but not a way that one's better than the other. There was just a difference, wasn't there? So like the Ramones are as much Mad Magazine as they are the Beach Boys, whereas, and I love Mad Magazine, but in Britain, in the late 70s, it was pretty desperate. It was getting desperate here. So it was reflected in the music, whether it's intentional or not. I'm sure most bands form for a laugh, and then it gets serious, doesn't it?
Would you have considered the Stooges to be a pop band or a punk band?
Well, I like to think it's all pop music in a way. I think the original British punk was pop music, and it got in the charts. That's another big difference. In America, the top 40 at that time, none of these bands would get anywhere near it. But in Britain, the Sex Pistols had a #1 album. They had top 5 singles. Bands like the Stranglers, who were fringe on the scene in a sense, but Stranglers had 4 top 10 hits in 1977, an album that's in the top 10 for a whole year. So these are kind of like weird pop bands, and I like the idea of pop music being that subversive. As years went on, punk had to become underground. But what's the point of being underground? I mean, you're just playing to the 10 people who already agree with you. I think you should always get interesting ideas and put them in the mainstream. Punk was populist when it started.
I thought it was interesting in your book because I've been like into punk history, reading about it for like since I was 14 or so. Is that so many of these guys were basically what me and my friends would think is so unpunk, like just like, oh, we're going to start a band, get a manager and try and get the right costume and get the right look and have the right looking drummer who looks cool rather than be our friend or who's a good drummer. It's just like, he's got the look, so he's in and he's cool looking. And it's just like seemed very fabricated, almost like the Monkees, where they were really planning for success from the get-go. Even though they were doing it in an outrageous way, playing weirder music than most people do. But I was surprised by that, how all these early punks were like, oh yeah, we want to play the game.
In a sense, that sums up the cultural difference between the American scenes and the British scenes, I think. Although the early American scenes, I mean, the Ramones were definitely all made up. They weren't brothers, and they all wore leather jackets on the stage, but never off stage, The Ramones are as fabricated. I mean, the Ramones don't even play on some of their records, do they? I mean, Johnny Ramone was so unasked about being on the records. He let Joey Ramone's brother play some of the guitars on the records. I mean, you could not get a more prefabricated band in a sense, but it doesn't stop them being a completely genius band. It's, I don't. In England, it's different because a lot of the pop culture and music culture comes out of the art schools, and there's always that debate, even before punk, that music doesn't have to be real to be real. Do you know what I mean? It's not. I mean, Bruce Springsteen, he's done some good stuff over the years, but it's all about the sweat and the graft. And when Bruce is on stage, he gives it everything and collapses 2 hours into his set because he's giving you everything, which in England doesn't really, it's not all, I mean, it's a generalization, but it's more, in England, that would seem a bit more stupid, really. It'd be a bit more, you know, like Bowie is so different from Bruce Springsteen. So Bowie's completely dressed up. He's not an alien, it's a pretend alien in the 70s, the glam rock Bowie. And it's all completely fake, but at the same time, this is the clever bit, it's actually incredibly emotional, emotive music. So it works in lots of very subtle layers. So yes, you have to get the drummer that looks right, but it still has to be the right drummer.
Yeah, right. He still has to be good, right?
I guess Diva learned that lesson from England. Yeah,
I think they were. I think they were really into British pop culture. You can see some of those ideas. There are American bands who do the British pop culture thing. I think a classic one, Sparks, who've never been that big in America, but huge here. And still, they even had a hit last year here, which is amazing for a guy.
Wow.
He's about 75, and I interviewed him because they're amazing guys. But they were so into the British stuff, and they understood it's, you know, he dressed up like Charlie Chaplin, or was it Adolf Hitler? You couldn't tell, and it was
very similar.
On purpose. Yeah, I know, it's the same little moustache. Well, that's why Hitler had that moustache, wasn't it? So he's kind of like, he's quite unnerving but funny at the same time. But they understood the power of image, and I think the power of image is important in British pop culture. Always has been, but it doesn't take away from the emotive kick of the music. Yeah, so people wanted it to look right and sound right because people looked at this because the art school thing was so important in England, whereas in America, the art school thing wasn't that big in pop culture. But from the late 50s all the way up to about 1990 UK, most of the best bands have been to art school, and they looked on their bands as works of art. So they had to look right, sound right, and everything they did was like a work of art, even the way they walked and everything. We'll just talk about that before, because the art school thing's died off here, you know, so it's not quite as big an influence as it used to be. And sometimes the Americans don't get this from British bands. You get a band like Roxy Music, who are really influential in Britain, a big band here, but in America, they're never more than a cult band. People just didn't understand the whole thing about them. They look too dressed up. They look like it's all style and no content. But over here, because we get the codes, we know of our own bands, which we should do since we grew up in the same towns, we get the codes and we understand that there's little nuances going on there. It's clever.
Yeah. So were you a journalist before you were in a punk band, or vice versa?
No, at the same time, really, because when I was at school, we got really into punk, and we'd been into music before that because I love glam rock. But then punk came along, and then somebody brought Buzzcocks' first single, Spar a Scratch EP, and it looked really homemade because it was homemade. And at that point in time, I thought you could actually make your own records, because growing up in a little town like Blackpool, where I grew up, there's no way. How do you get a major record label? They didn't even know what they were or who to go to, because they're only 16. So when we realised you can make your own records, that was amazing. Then somebody brought a fanzine to school, which is called Sniffing Glue, which was like the big punk fanzine in London. And we thought, wow, you can actually just get a typewriter and write stuff and become a journalist. And that's what I did. And I think a lot of people in my generation did that. Nobody ever learned how to do it. You just made it up as you went along.
Well, that's a fascinating idea. Sorry, Brendan, go ahead.
I was going to say, going back to what you were saying earlier about the British side and the American, when in the 80s, I know that, you know, what we had in America going on was we had hair bands, and we had, you know, that kind of glam rock sort of thing. And they were the ones here doing the outrageous outfits and the poofed hair. And so I think a lot of the way that the American hardcore punk scene kind of was a reverse of that. Like, we weren't those people. They weren't us, you know, we weren't driving around in hot cars in LA. We were, you know, essentially, I think what I think in both places, what it really tapped into is working class youth, particularly working class youth who didn't fit in. And that's where they found it. And here, I think we almost went anti-fashion. In a lot of ways, at a reaction to the fashion bands of the time, like, you know, Motley Crue or, you know, Van Halen or whatever.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, the American glam bands, because to me they're not really glam. You know, to me glam was always Bowie, T-Rex, Slade, and you know, the great British glam bands. the American bands that came later, they seem like a different style of music. They look different and felt different. It's a funny thing with musical terms, isn't it? Because they go through generations. It's like R&B now. It's not what R&B was in the 60s. It's a completely different style of music. And the same with punk in a sense. I mean, what gets called a punk band now isn't really, it's so far removed from what punk was. Why don't people just have a different term for it? I don't understand why it has to be the same term. You know, I think Green Day are a great band, and he is a very good songwriter, but they're not a punk band. They're not the Clash or anything. It's not raw. It's very tidied up. And this is not a critique of Green Day, because they're good at what they're doing. It's just a different style of music, and it should have a different name. And they themselves, interestingly, don't ever claim to be a punk band. They just say we're a pop band. And the songs are good. They have good content, and they sing about stuff. You know, American Idiot was a fantastic song to put out, and to get into all the mouths of America, right into the audience. Brilliant. I applaud them for that. But it's become a different genre of music in a sense. You know, and the hardcore scene. Well, I love the hardcore scene. You know, like Mind Threat, Black Flag. Those bands are amazing bands, and I know those people. I spoke to Ian Mackay 2 weeks ago on Zoom, and we dock in with each other every now and then. And they actually got in touch because Mackay and Rollins, they utterly love British punk. So when I speak to those guys, they'll talk about bands. I think, fuck, how the hell have you heard of that band? You know, Rollins, they've got in touch because Rollins wants to put out a single of a band from Manchester from 1977 that most people in Manchester have never heard of. So they wanted me to go try and find this band, and I found them. These guys, you know, the guys in this band in their early 60s now, they're not even on the internet. It took a bit of a detective work to find them, to get permission to put the track out. So it's interesting because they were getting British punk, but only the singles. They couldn't see it. They could only hear it. So for them, it's purely on the music. So the idea these bands have a style or a look, they wouldn't even know what they look like, because pre-internet.
We can get you an interview with somebody from the Weird Lovemakers.
Who is that?
Yeah, that's a stumper. That was some crappy band I was in the 90s, and Matt always likes to bring it up with people.
I think it's
but one day we'll find somebody who's heard of your band, Greg.
Yeah, one day.
So where
it'll be like Prince Charming.
Where were you based with that band?
What?
Where were you based? Which town?
Oh, Tucson, Arizona.
Okay. Oh, it's one of the few American cities I've never been to.
Yeah, kind of out there in the desert.
Yeah, I've been to a few desert cities. I've been to Phoenix and Albuquerque and places like that.
Yeah. Would you go on trips just to like check out the other scenes, punk scenes around the world and stuff? Like go see some shows when you were there?
If I've had the time, and generally I was touring America, so you'd have to get, you know, it's like you have to do 20-hour drives every day, don't you? So you don't have a lot of time in every town. But if I was in a town, there's a show on, you'd always go. And when you play the gig, you'd always meet the bands, because they'd either come to the gig or you. And also when I've been a journalist, I've been to other cities in America to write about bands, you know. So, I mean, I've done all the trips to LA and, you know, and into Texas and New York. So I've been all over. And I met a lot. So I know a lot of the scenes, you know, a lot of the bands. So when they came to Manchester, they'd always get in touch. You always go and see them. So nearly all those bands in the 80s and 90s that were coming out in that scene, I've either interviewed them or met them or played with them. You know, so people like Dinosaur Jr., whatever, you know, Big Black, all those groups, you know, Sonic Youth, all that kind of scene. I guess you could call it the post-hardcore scene in a way, couldn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you have very eclectic musical taste, from what I understand. So what would be a band that you're a big fan of that most people wouldn't expect from you to be a fan of?
Well, actually, I was listening to the first album from Yes yesterday, and I put it up on the Facebook page, and everybody's freaking out like it was like, this is not allowed. I was thinking, well, surely punk, there are no rules, and you telling me what I'm allowed to listen to? And actually, their first two albums aren't anything like their latest stuff. They're a bit raw, and there are. I mean, the thing is, all those boundaries between the musical cultures are just made up by journalists. I mean, most music fans and musicians, who I tend to hang around with more than journalists, musicians don't have boundaries. Musicians like all styles of music, you know. So, you know, so Steve Jones from the Sex Pistols, his favourite band of all time is Boston, isn't it? So it's, And people go, well, how can that be? He's in the Sex Pistols, aren't they enemies? But it wasn't really like that. Musicians, they may be a group that they culturally don't resemble, but they might just like the guitar sound. It's whereas journalists, it's all about the perception of a band or the story of a band. So that could be a completely different type of band than that, because it's in their heads really. But musicians don't read that stuff. They're just interested in the bits of music, which is music's so fluid and it's cruel as well, because you try to get as cool a record collection as possible, but of course you like a lot of stuff that isn't cool at all, don't you?
Right. It's like marketing versus music kind of thing.
It is, and I understand marketing, the power of perception, but at the same time, I like to listen to what I want to listen to without anybody telling me what I can and can't listen to. And I'm like most people, my music taste is really eclectic. I mean, of course, punk is the powerful one because it's a life changer, but I can listen to Aphex Twin, Yes, the Ramones, all at the same time virtually by jumping around on Spotify. And it's and they all make sense to me as well. I think there should be no boundaries, and you just like what you like, and your instinct is the only thing that dictates your music taste, isn't it?
Maybe it's time for a tour of Yes and the Ramones and Aphex Twin all together going
Which
out.
would be fantastic. I mean, that
would be a really interesting tour.
That's why I really love Glastonbury, because at Glastonbury, it's so ridiculously eclectic. You can go watch somebody, Stormzy, do a grime set as a headline, and then you go to another stage and watch The Damned, which I did a couple of years ago. So it's like or go and watch some African music and then go to a rave or something. It's all in the same field at the same time. And I think to me, it's a good sign. I think anybody who likes one style of music, it makes me wonder what their minds are like. There's obviously there's a musical culture you'll draw more towards, but it's not exclusive, is it?
Oh yeah, I remember it when I was very much into punk rock music and hardcore music and all that, and my friends would come over and I'd put on Elton John and they're like, "Are you serious right now?" And I'm like, "The songwriting is amazing. The stories he's telling." They're like, "You're fucked in the head, dude." And I'm like, "No, it's great."
No, you're right. It shows. I mean, they probably like it, but think they can't say they like it, which is quite sad, really, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, it's true.
And early on, Elton John did have some great records, didn't he? I mean, he got less interesting right along. The other interesting about Elton John is he's actually really broad-minded. He actually likes a lot of punk bands, and it's been several times over the years when he's actually bailed a few people out. And like he's bailed out a few venues in England, and he's helped bands put records out. And he's actually really in touch. He's got a huge record collection, and he's kind of for no reason. He doesn't really have to do any of that at all, does he? I mean, this guy's loaded. Right. He's in his 70s. He doesn't have to be interested in what the rest of us are all up to, but he is, and he's into young bands. So there's a great band in UK now called Idols. I think they're just coming out to the States now. They've had 2 #1 albums here, and it's kind of very post-hardcore, actually, very noisy mosh pit band, and they're massive here. And he's a big fan of theirs. Not to make himself look cool, just because he's genuinely into it. And right. His music taste is very wide. He goes disco to punk, across loads of styles, and I could trust somebody who has that kind of mindset, So I can't think of anything less punk than only liking punk.
I kind of want to see Elton John's punk album. If he could be that into it. Could Elton John I'm sure he could. He's a brilliant guy. He could put a punk album together.
Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting. That
was took the words right out of my mouth. Yeah. Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting is one of the most punk rock songs maybe ever written.
I mean, punk rock didn't just appear in 76, 77. There's loads of precursors, I mean, the Beatles' Helter Skelter is a punky track, isn't it? I mean, a lot of bands that have their little punky moments,
I guess a lot of the early Who stuff is probably like that.
Yeah, Kinks as well. I mean, the Who took everything off the Kinks, didn't they? I mean, the Who will tell you that, won't they? I saw the Who, actually. I've only seen him 1-7. I saw him play Canada about 3 years ago when I was in Canada. And I went to see him. I thought, oh, they're just going to be really boring. They're actually really pretty amazing 2-hour set. I'm not a massive fan, I don't have all the albums, but I thought for 2 hours they're really good, and in a way that I didn't expect at all, So that was, I like the singles and things. They're not to me. They're not one of the giants of the '60s. They're not my favourite of the classic British groups. They're good, but they're not as great as the Stones or the Beatles or the Kinks, really. which are the classic four, aren't they, from that period? From
Yeah,
the UK.
and the Stones always been a favorite of mine, and also kind of punk rock. And like if you look at the Beatles, like I had this discussion with my wife. There are like two types of people. There are Beatles people and there are Stones people, and I'm a Stones person. She's a Beatles person. Anyway, for what that's worth.
I prefer the Beatles. I think they're more consistent.
Yeah.
They're actually more rock and roll, you know, where John Lennon's voice is way more intense than Mick Jagger's. And I like the Stones. I mean, actually, this breaks your argument because I like both bands. But
oh, I like them both too. But, you know, if I had to pick.
The Beatles could do a whole album, and the Stones were a great singles band, you know, in the 60s. You know, so the Stones albums could be 2/3 could be good, and the other third could be a bit like, they run out of ideas, or they run out of the Beatles ideas because they're always copying the Beatles.
Well, they're either copying the Beatles or they're copying Chuck Berry, one of the two.
Yeah, it's kind of copying the Beatles, but always using a Chuck Berry riff, which they honed to perfection. In fact, that was one of the great things about the Stones, wasn't it? Because they gave black music a platform, you know, in the white community. So the first time they went to America, they insisted that Howlin' Wolf did the TV show with them, and it's an amazing clip. Howlin' Wolf just stood there looking really confused because he's never been on telly before, and then he starts singing, and it just sounds like the most amazing voice ever, doesn't it? You know, and they're sat there watching like they're watching God, you know, and so they're paying their dues in a way. So that was great, you know, saying this is where we got it from. Check this guy out, you know. But for me, I mean, I was going to see the Stones to this day, and I saw them at Glastonbury last time about 5 years ago. But I'm one of those Brian Jones Stones. If there ain't no Jones, there ain't no Stones fans.
So you sound to me like you got into journalism because you're actually just a huge fan of music, and you're just very interested in the people that you communicate and talk to because you just want to know more about them. That's kind of what and I think that seems to be what drives your book writing as well. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's the mystery of creativity, you know. I mean, maybe in a way it's really selfish. You're trying to work out why you do it yourself. I mean, it's hardly a career option, is it? It's just it's like a business, isn't it? Well, why am I doing this? I haven't got a clue. I'll go and ask somebody else and ask them why they're doing it. Maybe I'll find out why. And I think the other thing is trying to work out why you like all this completely different music. You know, I'm interested in how people tick. You know, and it's not necessarily just musicians, but music for me is a central core of stuff. I'm as interested in science and paleontology and the universe and loads of other things. I don't often get the chance to interview those people, but
yeah, you had a concert where you brought scientists on stage, or at least a tour or something like that.
Yeah, because I've done TEDx talks. So the first TEDx talk I did, there was 3 scientists from the CERN project at the talk about neutrinos and the Higgs boson particle. You know, the project where they got the smallest thing you could possibly have, which is a Higgs boson particle. And they were doing talks, and one of them was really into punk. So he asked me about punk, and I said, well, can we just talk about the universe? Because he was also running the CERN project in Switzerland. He's an American guy. And he actually went to the same school as Laurie Anderson. Isn't that really bizarre? A little town in Illinois, a tiny little village. So she wrote the theme tune for CERN, which is quite odd. So he told me all about the universe and how the universe, they think there's multiverses and it's just endless. It's just this infinite amount of universes all wrapped around each other. And they're all, as we're sat in this room now, they're all swirling around us. And it's, the more you talk about it, the weirder it gets. And the weirder it gets, the better it makes your head feel, makes your head spin. And from that, I thought it's the most psychedelic experience I've ever had, is talk about the universe and actually how utterly bizarre it is. So I did a double album about that feeling, you know, and it wasn't like it was about the universe, but it wasn't like songs going, the sky is full of stars. It wasn't that like dumb, but it's more about the feeling that you get thinking about the universe with songs that will reference things in the universe, but they'd be about other stuff as well, because my father died at the same time. So I threaded that in there to deal with that. And it was the idea that all matter returns back to the universe. So we're all part of the universe. And I mean, there's no afterlife like heaven, but there's an afterlife in the fact that all the matter that makes it your body just goes back into the universe and it's there forever. We're actually made up of stuff that comes from the Big Bang. Some of the oldest matter they've ever found is in our bodies. It's just amazing, isn't it? You know,
wasn't that in the song Woodstock or something from Joni Mitchell, that we're all stardust?
Yeah. And it's true, we are. It's an amazing thought, because on one level it sounds like a really glib line, but when you actually think about it, it's incredibly profound, isn't it? It's a powerful thing to think. And I also think the other idea I got into, which is a key theme in the record, one of the tracks was called The Hum of the Universe, is the universe actually has a musical note. It's something like B flat minor or something. So we did a track in B flat minor to try and get to that hum of the universe. And it does have this sound. It's a sound of the Big Bang. It's a Big Bang. Obviously, it doesn't, you can't have the sound going through a vacuum. So it doesn't, if you went off across the universe, you wouldn't hear it. But the vibration it makes is equivalent to that musical note. And then I thought that's a bit like meditation. If you're meditating and get into the armor, maybe music and meditation and the universe is all tuning in to the original sound of the Big Bang. And I thought that makes an interesting idea for a track for a punk rock song, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So basically, the universe is punk rock at its core.
So one of these universes that surround us, is there a universe where Elton John started punk rock in 1970?
Well, see, this is what they say. There will be, because what they say, and they can't prove this obviously, but what they think is every single thing that could possibly happen is happening in another universe. So there's infinite universes with infinite variations of everything that's ever happened. So one universe, the meteorite didn't hit the earth and wipe the dinosaurs out, and they just carried on. So
right, the multiverse theory is fantastic.
You've got dinosaurs and
punk rock.
Oh, dinosaurs are wearing like three-piece suits and neckties.
Yeah, which would be really cool, wouldn't it? Because I was only thinking about this yesterday. What if they had carried on? Where would they end up? Would they have developed into like? Would there be a human version of the dinosaur, or would they just carry on lumbering around as they were? Because they were the most successful animal species this planet has ever produced. They didn't really have to develop any further. They were the pinnacle, and we're just like the afterthoughts. I mean, we're only here by mistake. If that meteorite has swerved 20 meters and whizzed off the side of the earth and didn't hit it, we won't be here. It's just amazing, the randomness of everything, isn't it?
Yeah, so basically, well, I mean, dinosaurs, a lot of them were vegans, which kind of brings us to our litigation for today. You know, when I first came across the concept of veganism, I was at a restaurant in Washington, D.C., and I was in my early 20s, and I hadn't heard about it. And so they had stuff on the menu which had the word vegan next to it. I'm like, going, is this people from the planet Vega? I'm like, where? I'm like, I didn't know about it. Wasn't familiar with it. So
you know where the word comes from now, don't you?
Where it actually comes from? I actually don't know where it comes from.
It's just it's a British guy came up with it in about 1948, and obviously the original concept is the same concept as now. You don't eat anything to do with animals, you know, but it's actually the word vegetarian shrunk down to vegan. So it's like a vegetarian, so it's vegetarian.
So like a shorter vegetarian.
Version, yeah.
So it's only vegetarianism for little people.
Well, actually, is it the gorillas are virtually vegan, and they're pound for pound the most muscular animal on the planet, aren't they? You wouldn't go to a gorilla and say, "Is there any protein in that, mate?" and start poking it in the face, would you?
Well, it's like that with rhinoceroses too, right? Aren't they like strictly vegan as well?
I don't think they are. I think, but there's a lot of big animals that are in there. It's really odd because I've been vegan for years, and you used to have to explain what it was all the time, but now it's mainstream now, and it's amazing. Within 5 years, it went from being a bit like Nirvana, actually, when they went from being a cult band, you go and see them play to 30 people in Manchester, then 3 months later, they're the biggest band on the planet.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a sea change going on in terms of shifting of perspectives across the landscape, you know, and so many different areas, and I think that's where you get the quote unquote woke culture. In other words, people are waking up to these different ideas and they're starting to embrace them more. But are they embracing them because it's punk or because it's pop? You know, is veganism punk or pop right now? That's the real question, I think.
It's actually gone beyond that. I think it's well, I would say this because I am a vegan, but I think it's a really good idea. I think not non-harming of animals is a really good thing. But I'm not a snobbish vegan. I don't care what anyone else eats. It's between you and yourself what you eat. You make this, as long as you know and have a little think about it, and if you're prepared to eat ham or pork, and you know it comes from a pig, and you know how the pig got to end up on your plate, and you make that decision, that's okay. Just make that decision. And And I don't think people should be guilt tripped. They should just be presented all the information to make their own minds up. So it's pop now. It's not punk anymore. But this is interesting because I just wrote that book you talked about before, Manifesto, with Dale Vince, who's Britain's leading green energy provider. And we talk about this a lot, me and Dale, this idea of green populism, and it's trying to get these ideas into the mainstream, so that they're not so. I mean, obviously, somewhere like Portland, near where you're living, isn't it? Or maybe you are in Portland, Oregon.
Oh, yeah. Greg lives in Portland. I live on the outskirts.
I've been to Portland a couple of times. It's great. It's a cool city, and it's like a hipster town. It's probably America's biggest vegan town. I might just got the most vegan place in it. But how do you take these ideas to, let's say, Tucson, which I'd imagine is probably not so hipster, and it probably thinks these ideas aren't for the likes of us, whereas these ideas are for everybody. So you've got to be careful when you come up with these things that it's only for people who can afford to do them. It's got to be for everybody, and that's what me and Dale Vince always say with this idea of green populism. So at the moment, populism is currently, Donald Trump or Bolsonaro in Brazil. But why can't we have populism with good ideas instead of like rancid, horrible ideas? Great ideas are for everybody to embrace. And this
I think if Trump was painted green instead of orange, he might have gotten more support from people.
If only there was a green version of Trump, somebody who could communicate with the person on the streets, but with great ideas, who wasn't a completely horrible person, And I think that's what this planet needs, because let's face it, we've only got about 10 to 15 years to sort this mess out. We can't keep kicking the can down the road. This is actually getting pretty desperate now,
In Portland, we're doing our part, though, because we even have vegan strip clubs here. That's how vegan this town is. You can go to a vegan strip club. There's 3 of them, I think.
Well, I don't have no problem with that. I think it should be, why shouldn't it be sexy? Why it shouldn't be like living like monks. This is the idea about the populism thing. It shouldn't be like it shouldn't be austere. It should be fun. And the idea, this is what this guy Dale Vince does. He makes cars. He makes electric cars. He's like a bit like a British Elon Musk, but less creepy. And so, he's an ideas person. So people will say to him, what he did this year, what he kept this year, he got this thing. He's making diamonds out of air where they suck the air in. They compress the carbon and make diamonds out of it, clean the air up, take all pollution out of it, and pump it out the other side. So it's good for the environment. And he's making diamonds. He owns a football club where it's the only vegan sports club, professional sports club in the world. So all you can eat there if you get a burger, it's a vegan burger. And at first,
do they use vegan footballs though? Are they made from leather? Or are they made from?
No leather, nothing. Everything's vegan in that club.
Okay.
Yeah, but balls aren't leather now because the leather balls are heavy, and people heading them was giving them a lot of footballers in Britain are dying in their 60s and 70s because they used to head the balls, and it's giving them dementia. So it's there's a couple died last week. So the balls are lighter and safer now, and they're not made out of leather. So he's got all this stuff going on. He's going to build a new ground that's made out of bamboo, so it's organic and everything. And all the fans are going up in arms because we can't eat vegan burgers. But then he started eating them, and they tasted better than the burgers that they had before. And now they all love the vegan burgers, and that is green populism in action. So you still have your burgers, but nothing had to die to get into the burger. So
I learned that works better is if you don't label them as burgers, people are more willing to eat the thing because they're expecting like a burger whenever they get something like that. And then they get disappointed because it doesn't taste the way it should taste.
Well, it's in their heads because at first because at the end of the day, the thing that makes a burger taste good is the relish. It's the thing that's.
Well, I'll disagree about that one. For me, what makes a burger taste good is the fat coming from the cow dripping into your mouth.
You could fake all that as well. And if you had one of these burgers, you probably wouldn't be able to tell.
I have actually been vegan off and on, not politically, but just specifically food-wise for a while. So I go back and forth. I have stages where I'll do like strict veganism for a while, and then, but again, not on a political point of view, just like for food purposes. But then I'll go back.
I applaud that. I think it's great. Even something just one day a week where they don't eat meat, I say that's good because it's not easy for a lot of people. I mean, for me, I was never that mad on meat, so it wasn't hard for me. But for some people, it's their favorite thing in the world. They look forward to that every day.
Yeah, it's hard to give up ham sandwiches, man. I mean, that's a challenging one.
That's one thing. Hey, but it's the thing in England, food was so bad in the 60s. To me, like the bread was always dry, and the ham was like it had been for about 2 years before. But the country I live in now is so different from the one I grew up in. We actually have The one I grew up in, when you used to go out, there's 3 types of sandwich, and that's all you could get: egg and cress, ham sandwich, and a cheese sandwich, and that was British food.
Yeah.
We had terrible food, for years, but now we have amazing food. Manchester.
When did you become a vegan, John? What year did you become?
I was vegetarian first. So that was in the 80s, and then I became vegan 12 years ago. Yeah,
I had a cousin who became vegetarian because he said it gave him better trips on acid.
That's probably the best reason you possibly have.
Sure.
And that was like back in the late 60s, apparently, for him.
Well, I find it interesting, like within the going back to our earlier statement, within the punk rock universe of people who choose not to eat meat or eat some sorts of meats or some sorts of animal products, there's a whole subgroup which I'm still trying to wrap my wits around. So there's vegans, and then there's, somebody help me out, pescatarians.
Yeah, they only eat fish.
They only eat fish.
Fish and vegetables. Yeah.
Fish and vegetables. Yeah. See, I could probably do that because I could probably give up ham and beef because I'm getting older. But man, I love me some fish. To go back to Nirvana, it's okay to eat fish because they don't have any feelings.
Yeah,
right?
fish have no feelings.
Well, they do, but it's harder to imagine their pain, I suppose. But,
now, supposedly you were the first person to interview Nirvana as a journalist. Is that it?
Yeah.
In the UK or in general?
Well, I didn't even know I was the first. If someone did a book, and my interviews in first. I go, and I wrote to them and said, yeah. They hadn't even been interviewed by a local fanzine, which is really weird. I thought it was somebody who picked up on them, but it was super early on. I had to ring him at his mum's house. So I can still remember it. Yeah, Kurt, there's somebody on the phone, like shouting up the stairs, So it was like there was nothing to ask him. It was just like a really unknown band. How did you form? It was one of those kind of interviews. Then about a year later, we went out to New York to interview them for Sounds, the paper I was writing for. We stayed with them, actually. We stayed for 3 days in a flat in New York. Janet Billig, who ended up looking after bringing up the daughter, actually, and she was part of the whole thing with them. So there's us and a band called Tad and Nirvana, all in this tiny little flat, slept back to back on the floor. The photographer got run over by a bus and broke his leg, so they had to patch him up. Can't stay in a hospital because it's America. He had no insurance, so he had to just lie there for like 2 nights before we could get him on the plane to get him home. And then we saw them play Maxwell's in Hoboken. There's about 20 people at the gig, and they trashed all the gear, and it was absolutely fantastic. I've still got the interview. I've got it on cassette, and I loaded it up, actually. It's online now. Yeah. So it's quite spooky when you listen back to it, because, it's you can remember it being in the room. It's like going back in the room at the time. And he's talk about how you have to be really intense to make music, and when you know the context of the full story, it's quite scary now. You think, wow, you can see where this is going to end up, and it ain't going to be good. Yeah.
Do you think that Courtney killed him?
No, I think he came from a family that was he had some of his uncles committed suicide, I think, and I think that end of America Northwest, it does have that kind of. There's a melancholy to it, like there is northwest of England. I think as it rains a lot, and it's that's what I think. That's the bands from this part of the country always resonated with that part of America as well. Like Joy Division were always popular in that part of the country. I think climate does have an effect on people. It just their mentalities and things. So I think I think it was never going to end up as a happy story. That was it.
I don't think it was going to end up in a happy story. Did Courtney have somebody pull the trigger? No. Did Courtney not help his mental state at all? Yes. Did she drive him psychologically towards where he ended up? Yes. I knew Courtney. I knew Kurt. I knew him, not real well, but enough that I could see before Kurt had a band, when he was just the kid that would come in from the bumfuck town that he lived in into the city to see concerts. Yeah. And he would hang out, and you could see he was troubled. You could see that he had issues, but you could also see a lot of that genius that ended up coming out. But Courtney, who was down from Portland, was not a good person. She was just not. I mean, I was a part of that whole sort of Seattle scene, so I have some again, I wasn't close with Kurt. I didn't call him up on the phone and hang out, but I went to parties and he was there and I ended up talking to him. But I think Courtney was a bad person. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I don't want to say I'm on the because I'm too far on the outside of the whole thing. I mean, did you know Mark Lanegan as well when he's coming through town? Because they all shared a flat, didn't they?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I left Seattle in '88. So,
okay, yeah. He's just coming into town then because he was from oh God, what's that town right in the middle of nowhere? About 2 hours going sideways from Seattle into the middle of America. I've actually been to this town
like
as well.
Spokane, or
it's near there. It begins with E. It's it's
Enumclaw?
No, it's God. Oh God, it'll come to me in a minute. But he's from there.
Yeah.
And he used to like 3 hour drive to Seattle to go and see a band play and 3 hours back again. And that's why he moved to Seattle in the end. And so they shared a flat. It was him, the guy from Earth, Dylan Carson. That's Dylan Carson, and Mark Lanegan. And that flat was pretty mad flat. I mean, I don't know if you read Mark Lanegan's book, but it's
no, I should.
they pushed the boat as far as they possibly could. There was a lot of hard drugs and madness going on, but it's a beautifully written book. I mean, it's because he's a very sensitive and brilliant writer. So even though it's a very rock and roll story, he's written it so well, it's captivating. Because in the wrong hands, a book like that, you just think, oh, not this story again. But he's written it so descriptively and so well, you're in the middle of the whole thing, you know. And so they shared a flat, and they were all very, very close. And we toured Mark Lanegan last year for about 5 weeks around Europe. So we kind of got to know him. As much as you get to know a bloke who's very quiet, you know. Yeah. But he's an amazing singer. God, he's got a voice, hasn't he? He's got a voice that's lived in.
Yeah.
Now, do you think it's because he's a vegan or not a vegan?
Oh, he's not. No, he's much more rock and roll than I am.
So you became a vegetarian, you said like 15 years ago? How long ago?
Oh, no, well, in the 80s, I must have been.
Oh, in the 80s.
30,
was it hard to find good vegetarian food then? Were you just living on
Just go to Indian
stuff?
restaurants. If you go to Indian restaurants, Greg, you're good.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, we're good for Indian restaurants here, but we didn't have any money then. We couldn't afford to go to restaurants because we were in a band. So what you would do is you'd have stew and eat stew every day. So you just boil up the vegetables. Then if you half it left and you put more vegetables in there, lentils, boil it all up, and it just boiled on forever. It was after about 2 weeks, it was a bit of a scary looking pot, you know. And that's how you exist. Because
you guys were like the young ones.
So you became vegetarian because you couldn't afford meat.
Yeah. No, because I live next door to an abattoir and the cows were looking.
Oh, that would do it.
Wow.
Yeah, well, you have no idea when you're growing up that animals are sentient. That's not the way we were brought up.
Yeah.
So you just think, well, they don't know. But then when you live next to an abattoir, and then also because there was a lot of people in punk who sing about being vegetarian, those ideas were going around punk. So punk wasn't all people sniffing glue and getting, you know, throwing beer at each other. There was actually a sensitivity to punk, and vegetarian was one of the big ideas in it. And so that idea was going around. And then you look at the cow's face and you look at his eyes, and you think, oh God, and I can still remember looking at it now to this day. And that took me.
Did you hear them getting slaughtered?
You couldn't hear them. I probably lived about 5 minutes, so it's walking around the corner, and it's a really broken, ramshackle old abattoir with holes in the walls. They stick the heads out of the holes, and you think, oh God, they know, don't they? They actually know what's going to happen. And
so for you, it was an empathy thing. It's like you were feeling empathy for the
And I'm not claiming any higher moral high ground on this at all. You know, that's just what I felt. You know, and if somebody doesn't feel that, that's up to them. You know, I have no judgment in this at all. It's not for me to tell the people what to feel. This is a very, very personal thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you're living near an abattoir and you're like hearing the screams of the rabbits that are being killed, or I'm sure they weren't rabbits. Rabbits. It's very well known.
The screams of the rabbits.
Well, that's why
the rabbit factory farms that are so big in America.
Rabbit is huge, Greg.
Well, rabbits was spread across Europe by the Roman legions. They used to take them around because they breed them really fast to make food to feed the legions with, and that's how they spread across the whole of Europe and then around the rest of the world. They're not actually they're only from the Mediterranean. North Africa or something. But now they're all over the world, aren't they? Because a bit like dogs, they're quite good at hanging around with humans and going on our journeys with us.
Well,
the curious history of animals.
Just wondering how rabbits then got to like North America, because the Romans obviously weren't settling that part of the world. It was, but I because we had
you got your own things, there, haven't you?
Jackalopes.
Yeah, you got loads.
Yes, and Yetis, Sky Squatch.
That's right.
That was a different episode.
Jackalopes, Bigfoot. You have the
Bigfoot
abattoir. That's why you don't see Bigfoot anywhere. It's because they're all been.
Yeah, the Bigfoot abattoir is just about 5 minutes south of Enumclaw, which is diagonal from Seattle, going not quite Puyallup, but over there.
Closer to
There's
Yakima.
that little clip on YouTube of Bigfoot in there, that really obviously faked up clip of somebody in like a gorilla outfit running down the river, in there.
Oh, yeah. Well, this area is like definitely Bigfoot country, and there's tons of people who truly believe that Bigfoot exists, and more power to them.
Well, people believe.
Yeah.
The stuff that people believe now is laughable, isn't it?
I would so rather.
Isn't that true?
I would so rather have people believe in Bigfoot than the fact that there is a satanic cabal running the government who eats children.
And that has
Jewish
space lasers.
Yeah, Bigfoot is really benign. If you want to go out in the woods and look for some big monkey, all power to you, man.
Yeah. It's a bit like, I was thinking, we haven't really moved on from the medieval times, when people used to dunk witches in water, and if they drowned, they're innocent. And if they didn't drown, they burnt them as a witch. And it's people go, that's insane. How do people think like that? And I think, I can tell you exactly how they think like that. Because that's how people think nowadays, isn't it? It's people go, well, I saw it in a YouTube clip, it must be true. This is the mentality now. It's madness, isn't it? And people are so certain about things they haven't got a clue about.
Right. No, I live in Florida, so I live in the most backward part of the world that any of us on this show live in. And I ended up here for reasons that have nothing to do with my desire to live here. But I literally was talking to somebody the other day who was telling me with a straight face, Hillary Clinton was arrested by the SEAL Team 6 people yesterday, and she's now being held in Guantanamo Bay, and Trump is going to be coming back. And I'm like, really? How did you find out about this? And he said, without breaking eye contact, went, oh, well, there was an article on Facebook. And I was just like, oh my God.
I have to give my dad a call. My dad used to be over personnel at Guantanamo Bay. He might know somebody. We could find out if Hillary's there or not.
Please, Hillary might be there. I don't know. She made several personal appearances, but maybe that was her reptilian clone. I'm not really sure.
She'll finally pay for her pizza. She'll finally pay the price for her pizza gating. Finally, right. Justice has been served.
I had no idea she had a reptilian clone, though. That's awesome. I want one of those.
You don't live in Florida. You'll only know this if you live here. This is why I have to get out of here, guys. Seriously.
Oh, but it gives us so much extra good material because of these stories you give us out of
Yes.
No. It's like living in North Korea.
So in the UK, obviously, you have lots of other weird conspiracy theories as well, and different types of stories. Are any of them that involve vegans? Is there like a vegan Bigfoot in?
They're from the planet star system Vega.
The biggest one really now is people who argue about getting the vaccination. Bill Gates is going to brainwash you and fill you full of microchips, and that's the argument that goes all over the internet at the moment. But most of those people will probably still get the vaccination.
That's so egocentric in my point of view. The whole microchipping thing. It's like that's one of the biggest conspiracy theories also here in terms of the vaccination. Like they've got you all like rounded up, so now they put the microchips in you. I'm like, okay, so do you really consider that you're that important that they want to waste their money on a microchip and follow you around all the time? I'm like, what is it about you that's going to like bring the U.S. government to its knees? And really, do you think our government is competent enough to be able to track all those people anyway? It's like, come on, you're giving far too much credit.
Yeah. They can't organise anything. They can't even organise getting their tax off most people, which is the one thing they want, let alone like microchipping you and following you to your supermarket and back every day.
And knowing you bought Twinkies and Coca-Cola and then making some database. Oh yeah, it's completely crazy.
It's not the government that would do that. It's marketing companies that would do that, you know? It's like if they're going to be tracking anybody, if anybody's going to be tracking anybody, it's the marketing companies. They're the ones who go after you.
Well, it's Bill Gates. It's the me culture, isn't it? Everybody thinks of themselves and not in terms of community, isn't it? So it's always about they're doing this to me, you know. It's I, and I think that's what the pandemic did. It held up a mirror to every government in every country in the world. And
so true.
You look in the mirror, it's not very pleasant, is it? You think it's just a load of people squabbling over. They're telling me I personally, me, have to go in the shop and put a mask on for 5 minutes. How dare they tell me to do that for 5 minutes a week?
Right.
Like, what a hardship. Yeah,
that harkens back to our episode last week where we had the concept of where our client was we're all narcissists. So, you know, it's I, me, everything. They're microchipping me or whatever else is going to be the bigger issue. I think vegans get a bad rap just because there've been a number. It's kind of like it becomes like a religion. You know, there's lots of people who are totally fine, and then you have the evangelists who decide to make everybody else wrong. You know, and I thought it was interesting that you had to kind of defend your point of view because you obviously know those other vegans who obviously should.
They're rare though, aren't they?
Be eating meat.
I mean, obviously, I go to vegan events and talk to them, you know, and I know a lot of vegans, and 99% of vegans aren't like that. You know, they feel strongly about what they eat, but they don't go out in the street and attack people and kick the burgers out of their hands and stuff. You know, it's like
although that'd be kind of cool, like gangs of vegans going around like knocking burgers out of people's hands. It's like the Monty Python fishwives that were like the angry grannies.
Apparently in Salt Lake City, there's some kids who take the straight edge thing that far. Like they're all vegans, they don't smoke or drink, and they'll beat up other punks if they see them smoking a cigarette or eating meat or something.
Yeah. It was Boston, wasn't it? It was in Boston. It was a band called Slapshot, wasn't it?
Yeah, I remember that.
The Boston hardcore scene in the early days, and they used to gigs used to knock people's drinks out of their hands and really adamant about it. And it's funny because obviously I know Ian Mackay, and he's the one who wrote the Straight Edge song when it started it all off. But it wasn't meant to be. It was a song about people ragging on him for not drinking. It wasn't like a manifesto for a new religion. So he looks completely baffled. I mean, obviously he thinks those ideas are right, but he wasn't singing in the song, let's go bully loads of people.
Right.
That's a good song title, though.
The fact that it manifested itself in Boston makes total sense because that's just an American Boston thing. They would take straight edge and turn it into a reason to beat somebody up.
And combine it with sports. And combine punk with sports.
And combine it with sports like hockey, right?
Yeah, see that always made no sense to us in England because there was no sport thing mixed in with punk at all in the early days. It was the idea that the Americans would go to gigs in sports gear would be like to us like, no way, you can't wear shorts at a punk gig. I mean that was not. So when you see pictures of American bands with their pumps on and shorts on and talking about, you know, and treating it as a physical event, that was so different from the English version of it.
You didn't have mosh pits in England?
Well, they call them mosh pits now because, of course, everything that America does, we have to do 10 years later, don't we? But, I mean, people used to pogo at the gigs and jump up and down and go crazy, but it wasn't called a mosh pit for years. And then we just gradually sort of sneaked in, and like the skateboard culture, which I remember skateboards coming out in England about 77, but they were seen utterly alien to anything to do with punk. It seemed such a weird thing that you could not imagine a punk going skateboarding. It'd just be so odd. But then the culture in America was skateboarding and hardcore. They say all blurred into one thing, didn't they? And it came over here, and it got blurred up here as well.
Because they had to do with a lot of skin knees and broken bones, probably.
You know what?
Odd.
Yeah, as a skateboard hardcore guy in the 80s, I didn't play sports, but I did have a desire to do some sort of physical activity. Skateboarding was something where for me, you could just focus on, and you just had to do something and do something and do something and do something and do something until you got it right. And for whatever reason, mentally, that was cool for me. And I don't know. I think there's a Venn diagram that, the type of people who skateboard and then become interested in punk rock music, there's an intersection for sure.
Because Thrasher magazine helped a lot.
Thrasher magazine,
was into punk so much that
I understand it now. I was just thinking back in when I was a teenager, it just wouldn't make any sense at all, because punk was so nihilistic. It wasn't about doing any exercise. It was about, right, we're going to live so intensely and we're all going to be dead by the time we're 25. What's the point of learning how to do skateboarding?
So of all the people that you've interviewed, and you've done tons of, who was the one that it was the most surreal moment for you that you couldn't believe you're actually talking to this guy or this woman? Who was that person for you?
I don't interview showbiz celebrities. So if I could say, oh yeah, it was Johnny Depp, and we're doing, it's not really like that. I just interview bands. And some of them get big, like Nirvana. Some of them are known in England, and some of them are kind of, culty bands. So it's a lot of the situations when you're interviewing the bands can be quite surreal, and there could be a lot of surreal stuff going on. But it wouldn't be in mainstream kind of terms. It wouldn't be like, oh yeah, I remember that trip to the moon with Marilyn Manson. It wouldn't really be like that. Well, God, his career's taken a bit of a nosedive.
Yeah, a little bit, right? Just recently, yes.
I mean,
the mistakes we make.
Yeah, you wanted to just go, oh, it's all a performance art thing, and then after it all starts coming out, you're like, yeah, I guess, yeah, that's probably true. I don't know.
It was obvious he was an unpleasant individual from the start, but he made great records. So
he did.
This is a difficult thing now, isn't it? Because everybody wants to cancel stuff, but you have to put your hands up and say that a lot of great art is made by people who politically, socially, culturally, you've got nothing in common with at all. You can't pretend not to like their records because they're horrible people, and this has become making it increasingly difficult to be a music writer, because quite a lot of musicians are not very pleasant characters,
True. Yes.
I prefer saying like this person is really horrible. I don't agree this thing is done, that thing that person's done, but I like the record. And because again, to what makes you like a piece of music, a lot of the time you hear the piece of music out of context of the person anyway, don't you? And I never met Marilyn Manson. I have no idea what he's like. I know people met him and said he isn't that pleasant, but when I listen to a piece of music, to think, I wonder what this person's like in real life, you'd have to, all your records spread along there, I'd just chuck them in the bin. I'm sure the drummer out of that band was horrible, it's
right, exactly. It becomes a whole thing of where do we stop judging art just because of art, and where do we start saying, well, I only like art because that person meets my my values or whatever.
I believe in calling them out. I think I don't, like Morrissey, talking shit, Morrissey. I don't agree with anything you're saying, but there's a point in time when you meant a lot of people, and you made some good records, and it's or other people, So I think you don't ignore this thing, but you don't just switch all culture off, because it's not just music, is it? It's books, film. It's across every culture, isn't it? It's the people do things that aren't pleasant, because
if you were only like following stuff of people that you agreed with, it would just be horrible art.
Well, it was, wouldn't it?
Can you imagine if Hillary Clinton actually did put an album out? It's like, what would that be?
I'd buy it.
You'd buy it.
I think
you'd like it.
Children.
If it really comes down to, I have to really love the person and totally the only art I would ever take in is something my 11-year-old did. It's like, well, I love her to death, and she's everything I would hope for. So that macaroni thing she did is fantastic. Yarn. It's
your
great.
Fridge would be covered with everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that is the flip round of it, isn't it? Because if you think all the people who are really nice people, they actually make pretty boring art. So Chris Martin out of Coldplay is a really nice bloke. He's a genuinely really nice person, but his band are pretty dull, aren't they? So it's you know, it's can you force yourself to like music made by people who are nice people? You know, it's a really weird 21st century argument, and I think it also blurs the issue because there are a lot of problems in the world, but putting your fingers in the ears and pretending that person isn't there anymore isn't going to make that problem go away, is it?
Right.
That's why you never heard of my band, John, because I was just so nice. I was just too nice.
I thought it's because I cancelled you.
Well, he's heard about you now. He's heard about the weird love makers, Greg. He knows all of them.
Well, there's two of them, so he might look up the other one. It was another band stole our name.
Oh God! When you get a really specialist name and somebody else has got it, that is annoying, isn't it?
Didn't file that copyright.
Yeah, but I don't think you can actually copyright. It's quite difficult. It's copyright. You start to have a very good lawyer to back you up on that.
It was really fun because we actually had a record out first. So that's basically all that matters, as long as you have a record out first. So these guys wrote us a snotty letter from the Midwest saying, you guys got to change your name. We're the Weird Love Makers. And we weren't even that chuffed about it. We were just like, actually, guys, we have a record out. We've been around for a year and you haven't. And they were like, so we were like, you don't even have to change your name. Just put a space in between love and makers. That's all we asked them to do. You could be the Weird Love Makers, but that to differentiate, you have to have a space. And then as soon as we broke up 6 years later, I noticed they put the space back. They got rid of the space. They were like, finally, we could be the Love Makers without a space.
They could just be the weirder Love Makers.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Weirdo.
Weirdest.
Like when dinosaur were told by the other dinosaur to change their name, and it's a band from the 60s, it's Grateful Dead spin-off. They just turned their name to Dinosaur Jr., which is really funny because it's kind of laughing at the dinosaur for being old dudes, you know. So,
well, Nirvana swapped the name, didn't they? Didn't the label there was a hippie band called Nirvana, and I think they said, "Hey, that's our name." Nirvana bought it. They were like, "Here's some money."
The hippie Nirvana are a really good band, a really good psychedelic band.
Oh yeah.
60s. In a way, they did a compilation of their stuff on the back of it, so people actually went to have a listen to it, see what they're like. The problem is when you get to Spotify, because often there's another Membranes in America which came about 8 years after us, and so on our Spotify page, their album's on the page, and I can never get Spotify to remove it. And the worst thing is that they're a pretty rubbish band. So if you've never heard us before and you go there and you hear them, you think that's what we're like. You know, that's the annoying bit, isn't it? I think, why can't Spotify just give them their own sodding page? You know, just go away.
Everyone should have a sodding page.
Yeah, that'd be a good name for a band, wouldn't it?
Or somebody who works in government. All right, so that brings us to the end of our particular show with Mr. Robb, with John Robb. Sorry, I went Mr. Sorry, I'm being ultra polite.
You could be formal. Yeah.
It's the English accent.
I believe that we've
should we call him Sir John Robb?
Yes. Yeah.
He should be knighted. I mean, if McCartney can be knighted, John can be knighted, for crying out loud.
Well, I think McCartney's quite a large contribution to popular culture.
Well, he hasn't written your book, though. I mean, come on.
Yeah. Okay. Mine's slightly larger. But the thing is now that even getting knighted is problematic. Would you get knighted by the royal family? You know.
Right now, right, exactly.
Yeah, they're like a problem family now, aren't they?
Oh, I was going to ask you. I was going to avoid the subject, but I have to ask because we don't have English people on our podcast that often. And of course, what do you think about this whole Oprah Winfrey interview and all that? What's your take on it?
You're no longer punk, Brendan.
Oh, come on.
I'm revoking your punk credentials.
I don't like either side, so it's she's obviously like Meghan Markle's obviously playing the celebrity game, but the grenade she's rolled into the royal family is hilarious because the royal family are completely on the back foot, and I'm not into the royal family. I think it's an archaic institution that we're stuck with, you know, and it's great to see them. I mean, we'll never get rid of them, but every now and then it gets difficult for them, and the moment is, especially with that thing about somebody talk about the baby, is it going to be too black? And right in the middle, Black Lives Matter, and it's on the international thing. It's playing out very badly. There was talk of Australia maybe getting rid of the royal family when the Queen dies. You know, I'm finally growing up.
Yeah, Canada too should probably go that way.
I think Canada will probably be the last country to have a royal family, because the thing about Canada is the royal family is their tool to say they're not American. Because when I go to Canada, they're the only people who ever talk about the royal family. I mean, Americans get sentimental about the British royal family. For some reason, they think it's great showbiz, but you go to Canada, it's actually it's like no. You know, that Detroit, you get shot in Detroit, and also we have the Queen's picture on our wall, and that's very Canadian, isn't it? And like I say, because I'm one quarter Canadian, so.
Wow, that's interesting. Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah, because of the whole pandemic, I do a lot of homeschooling with my daughter, and we had to get into royal families because we were talking about, I forget, the royal family is something or other. And I remember she looked at me and she's like, Dad, wait a minute, what? And I'm like, well, you see, there's this family, and because they are this family, they're kind of important. And she's like, but why? And I'm like,
because God said so.
I don't honestly know. I just can't answer that question.
It's because God said that they were important. That's really what it comes down to.
Right.
Yeah.
Your daughter's right, because the questions she's asking are the questions I ask every day. You know, it's why. But surely they should earn it. You know, at least Alexander the Great was a warmongering but great general who invaded half the world. Therefore, he earned his king role.
Right.
But what the royal family here, they when they do these parades, they have loads of medals on, and all the medals, not one of them's ever earned a medal. They just put them on to look like.
Those are attendance medals. They got those for like showing up at things on time.
I mean, all I can say is that the Queen should be acknowledged for living more than anybody else I can think of, and Prince Charles just has really bad taste in women, from what I can tell.
And there we go. All right. I want to thank you very much, John, for showing up. I don't know why you're showing up on our show, but we greatly appreciate it for our 3.2 billion listeners that we have. And this has been the Law Offices.
I'll look you up. I know.
He knows all about us.
Yes. Yeah. I was bullied into it by your friend Eileen.
She's a bullying publicist.
You've left the offices of Quibble, Squabble, and Bicker. It's over. It's over. It's time for you to go home. It's over. It's over. Go away now.